So here we are at Wesley Music Centre in Canberra in Australia, and it's finally our recording day. Before we present our entry, I'd like to tell you a bit about the journey that we have taken as an ensemble to submitting Journeying into the Recorder Competition. I was first introduced to the piece Journeying in Armidale earlier this year in 2023 at the week-long Recorder Festival that's held there. We were given a range of pieces in my small ensemble group that I was allocated to, but our group really liked Journeying, and in fact we spent the whole week just working on that particular piece, and we performed it at a blackboard concert, and I think the audience could tell that we really liked it. It was a song or a piece that I'd never really kind of heard before or played before, and it kind of really got under my skin, and I really enjoyed it. The audience must have enjoyed it too, because there was a bit of a run on the sheet music at the festival shop after we had played it. To prepare for a piece, I would normally get online and hear a lot of other groups playing it, to hear how they interpret the piece, how they play the piece, what speed they play, what intonation, etc. But I wasn't able to find a recording of Journeying online. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to record the piece so that other groups could also see it as well? So, as life goes by, the year got away from us. But about mid-year, I decided to ask my Canberra ensemble whether we would like to record Journeying, to be able to put it online for the groups. They said yes, and then not long afterwards, the Orpheus Recorder Competition was advertised. So I figured that the universe, things were lining up. So here we are doing Journeying. But of course, we only had the sheet music, so that was all we had to go off in terms of interpretation. So who better to get in touch with or to find out more than the composer themselves? So we did some research and found out that Diana Blom was based in Sydney, not very far away from Canberra. But we did some research and found that she's a pretty well-credentialed composer, a very an amazing woman. Thinking, I don't know, would Diana want to come to Canberra to do a workshop with us?
Hello, I'm Diana Blom, and I'm very pleased to be down in Canberra working with the Recorder Quartet on my piece Journeying. I was asked by Peter Patosh, who's a Sydney recorder player, to write a piece for 4 recorders for the 30th anniversary of his ensemble at the time, the Reluctant Consort. The inspiration stems from Peter Sculthorpe and his ethnomusicology classes taught in the 1970s at the University of Sydney. He focused on Balinese and Japanese music and was very influential on a lot of us, especially those of us who composed. He taught ethnomusicology as a composer, which was great. So he looked at the Belungan structure of the gamelan, the sounds of the gamelan instruments by themselves and together, the textures, the movement, and all of it was hugely influential on me. Wikipedia says the Belungan is sometimes called the core melody or the skeletal melodic outline of a Javanese gamelan composition. And all of these aspects of the gamelan play out at times in Journeying. Similarly, many aspects of Japanese music, because of Peter Sculthorpe, still play out in my own music. Not so much in Journeying, although I do use one of the Japanese scales in that section near the end. Then in 1974, I was composer in residence with the Australian Opera for a year, and Chitra Fernando introduced herself to me. She was an Australian Sri Lankanese linguist at Macquarie University, but she was also a creative writer, and she'd written a play called The Golden Bird, which she thought I might be interested in. So I set the play in 1987 for the upper primary students at Hong Kong International School, Repulse Bay, where I was living at the time. The play is set on an unidentified little pear-shaped island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, probably Sri Lanka. But for me, I just drew in aspects of the gamelan into my music for this primary school piece. Adding to all of this, I lived in Malaysia in the late 1980s and learned to play the Terengganu gamelan, all the instruments. This was a great time, being right inside the gamelan experience. So when Peter Patosh asked me to write a recorder quartet piece in 2005, I chose as the impetus a phrase or two from The Golden Bird, and it's a section of the children's opera that I really like, and this became the basis of the beginning, and it keeps appearing in Journeying. I never learnt the recorder at school, which is a pity. I'm a keyboard player basically with some strings. But I met Peter Patosh when he was at Macquarie University, and he asked me to head up a grant. It was called a court grant. They don't exist anymore, for the advancement of university teaching. And we'd never met before, and I asked him recently why he chose me to head up this grant. And we think it was through Elizabeth Hassan, who was a recorder player in his group at the time, and I'd been doing some harpsichord playing for her. The project being submitted for the court grant was in 1997. It was called Creating Ensemble, an interactive CD-ROM of Australian recorder quartet music. And it was a big deal at the time, CD-ROM. And the project team consisted of members of UTS and Macquarie University and my own university, which is Western Sydney University. It was then called UWS Nepean. And I remember my university ranked the proposal very low, and then it won. Peter is mad keen and very experienced recorder player who's recently graduated from an M.Mus performance in recorder at the Con. And I've written several recorder quartets for his groups over the years. Bebop Baloo-Bop Wop Bam Boom, which was written for the grant, Journeying, Armidale's Bass, and his quartet performed Nove Moderno, which was my very first recorder quartet. The latest recorder quartet composition is called Mendelssohn Fever, and it's in a project of Peter's, which are 19th century arrangements of music for recorder quartet, and mine's the only new piece, I think, and it draws on Mendelssohn, whose textures I love, and the Bee Gees to a lesser extent, but I also like them as well. They're at least referenced in the title. So the Golden Bird section is the melody and accompaniments from the first sort of, I'm going to say, measures 9 to 28. There's a little introduction. It's pentatonic, and it depicts the journey home of two of the young characters in the play. The words are now we're on the road again, journeying over hill and plain. So I thought, let's call it Journeying. There's a different pentatonic, there's quite a lot of different pentatonic scales on the piece. And I like the slides, I like the use of octaves between instruments, which swap around. And then there's lots of Belungan influence with the interlocking rhythms. There's also a little, sounds a bit like swung jazz, and when I was looking at the piece again, because it's been a few years now, I thought, gosh, this looks like Bebop Baloo-Bop Wop Bam Boom, which uses a lot of sort of jazz, semi-jazz rhythms. But actually the Balinese gamelan does go into this homophonic chordal style, syncopated, and then goes back to the sort of the buzzing, the purring along of the Belungan scale. So there's little sections of that. And then there's also some just pretty much pure minimalist sections. My PhD was on minimalism, and it's a composition style that I rather like, and I like to just pop it into compositions. I don't necessarily want to write a whole piece that's minimalist now in 2023 or whatever we're up to, but it is an influence that I find very engaging. And then right at the end there is the Japanese Hirajoshi scale, which is one that Peter Sculthorpe and Ross Edwards have used. Peter Sculthorpe was my composition teacher as well, so there's that sort of influence. And the descant recorder is, if you like, being a bit of a suling, which is a Japanese end-blown bamboo flute, which is often used with the gamelan, and the gamelan slows down and the suling rides over the top. So I'm using that. So there's quite a lot of these Indonesian ideas, musical gamelan ideas coming in. And then right at the very end, there's a pentatonic canon. Any tips from a non-recorder player? I do rely on recorder players to keep me on track when I write a recorder piece. So, look, it does need precision in terms of pulse and tempo in the strict sections. It needs to be very, very even. The Belungan sections, if there's no melody, need to be very even in terms of balance. Keep it well articulated and very together in the chordal sections that I was just talking about, the sort of slightly jazzy chordal sections, with a nice contrast as much as possible on the recorders between soft and loud, and then back to soft again. I've been reasonable with articulations and phrasing, thanks to Peter actually, because this is Peter Patosh, too many Peters. So I really value when the recorder groups tell me what to do, what to add to make the piece clearer. So keep the articulations really clear. At the end, the descant, have flexible fun with the melismas in that slow section. It's your section. And in terms of intonation, I'm not saying play out of tune, but there's a little flexibility in this piece that you can have with intonation. On the slides, there's quite a few slides for the recorders to do in octaves. There's quite a lot of octave writing between two parts. And also when they're up very high with what I call those ululation, sort of celebratory repeated sections. So there's a little bit of flexibility for intonation there as well. Not too much, but a bit. Well, I've heard it once, and it was in 2006. So that's quite a while ago. So there was a performance up in Mount Wilson in the Blue Mountains in Sydney, and that was the 30th anniversary of the Reluctant Quartet. And I remember I was at the back of the room. I could sort of hear the piece, and I have found I've got a recording of that performance. But other than that, I've never heard it. So it's lovely workshopping and hearing the piece. And thank you very much, Kelly. And it has been performed in Canberra at the All Saints Church at Ainslie, which sounds close by. Yeah, but that was back in 2006. So thank you for this opportunity. It's terrific working with a good group of recorder players, and you've got 2 on bass and 2 on tenor, which is a very nice full sound. Delicious.